The worst day of Grace's life didn't start with a scream. It started with a check. "Sign it," Eleanor Cross said, sliding the paper across the marble table like it was nothing more than a napkin. "Or I make sure my son never has a career to come home to." Grace was 22, 7 months pregnant, and alone in a house that smelled like money and threats. She looked down at the number. It was enough to buy silence for a lifetime. It was not enough to buy back the life she was about to lose. "He doesn't even know," Grace whispered. "And he won't," Eleanor said. "Not from you, not ever." 9 years later, Grace still remembers the sound the pen made against that paper. Not a signature, a surrender. She thinks about it every morning while she stacks tomatoes into pyramids at 5 a.m., in the same small town square where she once believed love was the only currency that mattered. She has no idea that today, the man who broke her heart, without ever knowing he did it, is driving back into town, not to find her, but to buy the very ground she's standing on. And she has no idea that this accident was never an accident at all. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because tonight's story is one of the most painful reunions we've ever told, and it doesn't end where you think it does. While you watch, drop a comment and let me know, what city are you watching from tonight? Now, let's go back to where it all began. Grace Whitfield had built a life out of small, stubborn things. A wooden vegetable stand on the corner of Miller and Fifth. A 9-year-old daughter with her father's sharp jaw and her own sharper mouth. A rented room above the hardware store that leaked when it rained but never when it mattered. She had not built a life out of hope. Hope was expensive, and Grace had learned 9 years ago exactly what it cost. "Mom, that man's been sitting in his car for 20 minutes just staring at the stand," her daughter Ivy said, not looking up from the crate of carrots she was sorting by size, largest to smallest, the way she always insisted vegetables should be displayed. "Should I be worried?" Grace glanced across the street. A black car, the kind that didn't belong on Miller Street, engine idling, windows tinted enough that she couldn't see who was inside. "Probably lost," Grace said, though something in her chest tightened in a way she didn't have a name for. Rich people get lost in small towns all the time. They think GPS is optional. Ivy snorted. "You always say that. Because it's always true." It was not this time. True. And the man behind the wheel had been given this exact address on purpose. Nathaniel Cross had shaken hands with senators. He had closed deals that reshaped skylines. He had not, in 9 years, allowed himself to feel nervous about anything that wasn't a number on a balance sheet. So he told himself the tightness in his chest was jet lag. "The parcel includes the corner lot," his assistant Marcus said, tablet in hand, walking half a step behind him the way he always did. "Current use is informal. A produce stand, no permit on file. Should be a clean acquisition. Your mother's office flagged this one specifically, said it needed your personal sign-off, not just a regional VP." Nathaniel frowned faintly. "That's unusual for a lot this small." "She said you'd understand once you saw it," Marcus said, and something in his tone made it sound rehearsed. Nathaniel didn't clock it. Not yet. He was looking across the street, at a woman with dark hair pulled back in a scarf, stacking tomatoes with the kind of care most people reserved for things they loved. Something about the tilt of her head made his ribs feel too small for his lungs. "I used to live 3 blocks from here," Nathaniel said quietly. "A long time ago, before all this." Marcus glanced up from the tablet, surprised. In 4 years of working for Nathaniel Cross, he had never once heard the man mention a home that wasn't a hotel, and he'd never once mentioned that his boss's own mother already knew that. "Sentimental?" Marcus asked, half joking. "No," Nathaniel said, though he didn't sound sure. "Just old ghosts." He had no idea one of those ghosts had been waiting for him. and that someone had made very sure he'd find her. Grace's hand froze mid-transaction. The customer said something about her change. She didn't hear it. 9 years had changed him. Broader shoulders. A suit that cost more than her stand made in a year. A face that had learned, somewhere along the way, how to hold nothing. No warmth, no softness, nothing that gave a person away. But his eyes hadn't changed. And for one unguarded second, standing on the sidewalk across the street, neither had his. "Mom?" Ivy tugged her sleeve. "You're kind of freaking out the customer." Grace blinked, forced her hand to move, made the change, smiled the practiced smile she gave to strangers. Sorry, long morning. But her heart was doing something violent and unfamiliar. Some old rhythm it hadn't remembered in 9 years. And across the street, Nathaniel Cross had gone very still. He didn't recognize the child beside her. Not yet. 9 years old, dark curls, a mouth that was already fixed in the same stubborn line his own mother's had been in the last photo of her he still carried. He recognized the woman. "Grace," he said, so quietly that only Marcus, standing beside him, heard it. And Marcus, for reasons he wasn't ready to explain, felt his stomach drop. He crossed the street. Of course he crossed the street. 9 years of practice control unraveled in 11 steps. Grace. Up close, the years had changed her too. A tiredness around the eyes that hadn't been there before. A wariness that made his chest ache in a way he didn't examine too closely. "I didn't know you still lived here." "I never left," Grace said. Simple, true, devastating, if he'd known why. "I heard you moved to the coast. Started over." He said it carefully, like a man checking a fact he'd been given a long time ago and had never questioned. Grace's jaw tightened. She knew, instantly, whose voice had fed him that lie. "Did you? That's interesting." Ivy, sorting carrots, looked up at the stranger with open, assessing curiosity. The same look she gave every adult who talked to her mother in that careful, loaded way. "Are you buying vegetables or just standing there?" Nathaniel looked down at her properly for the first time. Dark curls, a stubborn jaw, eyes the exact shade of his own mother's, the shade that had skipped him entirely and apparently landed somewhere else. "I'm not sure yet," he said slowly, something cold sliding down his spine. "How old are you?" "9, Ivy said. "Almost 10. Grace's hand found the edge of the stand and gripped it hard enough to whiten her knuckles, because she watched, in real time, the exact moment the math started happening behind Nathaniel Cross's eyes. And somewhere behind him, Marcus quietly stepped back toward the car, already dreading the phone call he knew was coming. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The street noise kept going, a truck idling, someone's radio, a bicycle bell, while the only thing that mattered in Nathaniel Cross's entire carefully built empire narrowed down to one small, sharp-eyed girl holding a carrot like a weapon. 9 years, he said finally, and it wasn't a question. "Nathaniel, 9 years, Grace." His voice had dropped, flat and dangerous in a way she'd never heard from him before, not in the boy she'd loved. "You left without a word, no calls, no letter. My mother told me you took a settlement and moved on because you never wanted this life in the first place." "Your mother," Grace said, and something old and furious finally cracked loose in her chest after 9 years of swallowing it, "told me that if I ever told you about this baby, she would destroy your career before it started. She told me she'd make sure everyone in this town and every investor in that city believed I trapped you. She had the paperwork ready before I even left her house." Ivy looked between the two adults, carrot forgotten in her hand, with the flat, assessing patience of a child who has spent her whole life reading rooms too fast for her age. "Are you?" Ivy said slowly. "My dad?" Neither adult answered. The silence answered for them, and neither of them yet understood that this exact confrontation had been engineered 9 years in advance by the woman who was, at that very moment, waiting to hear how it went. That night, after the stand was closed and Ivy was asleep on the pull-out couch with a cookbook she liked to read like a novel, Grace sat on the fire escape and let herself remember the parts she usually kept locked away. She remembered Eleanor Cross's voice, silk over steel. You will ruin him. A boy like Nathaniel doesn't survive a scandal like you. She remembered signing not because of the money, but because she had believed, genuinely, stupidly, 22-year-old believed, that loving him meant protecting the life he was building, even from a distance, even at her own expense. She hadn't known love could be a wound you kept choosing to reopen for someone else's sake. Across town, in the only hotel with a suite worth the name, Nathaniel stood at the window with a glass of something he hadn't touched and a phone call he needed to make, and couldn't yet bring himself to dial. His mother picked up on the second ring, not surprised, not rushed, almost pleased. Nathaniel, I take it you found the lot. Something about her calm made his stomach turn cold. You knew, he said slowly. You knew she was there. That's why you flagged this deal for me personally, isn't it? The pause on the other end of the line lasted 1 second too long. I met Grace today, he said again, harder. And I met her daughter, Nathaniel. My daughter, he said, and it wasn't a guess. He'd done the math on the drive back. 9 years, 10 months. It fit with brutal, unforgiving precision. And you sent me there yourself, didn't you? What did you think was going to happen? I did what was best for you, Eleanor said, her voice sharpening into the tone he remembered from every negotiation he'd ever watched her win. That girl would have chained you to a vegetable stand before you turned 25, and I needed to see, once and for all, whether that was still true. You didn't protect my future, Nathaniel said quietly. You've been managing it like a hostile takeover for 9 years. Including today. He hung up before she could answer, and for the first time since he'd become the man everyone in that boardroom feared, Nathaniel Cross had absolutely no idea what to do next, or how much further his mother's hand reached into his life than he'd ever let himself believe. The rezoning papers sat on Nathaniel's desk for 3 days. Before he touched them, he called Marcus into his office and closed the door. You knew, Nathaniel said. Not a question, not everything, but enough. You knew this deal wasn't random the moment my mother's office flagged it for my personal sign-off. Marcus didn't try to deny it. I knew she wanted you to handle this one yourself. I didn't know why until I saw your face outside that stand. I should have told you the moment I suspected. I didn't, because she's still the one who signs my reviews, and I told myself it wasn't my place. He met Nathaniel's eyes. That was a coward's excuse. I'm sorry. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. I'm not firing you, he said finally. But I need to know that the next time my mother hands you something to carry to me, you bring it to me first, not her. Understood, Marcus said. For what it's worth, I'm glad it turned out to be them, not the land. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start, and it was more honesty than Nathaniel had gotten out of his own family in 9 years. He drove to Miller Street that afternoon. Grace was expecting him. She wasn't expecting the folder he set down on the wooden counter between the tomatoes and the summer squash. What is this? The acquisition papers, he said. For the lot. Your stand is sitting on land my company already owns the rights to develop. He hesitated, something unfamiliar moving across his face. Not the cold command she'd watched him wear like armor all week, but something rawer underneath it. I could tear it down tomorrow. Legally. No one would stop me. My mother is counting on exactly that. Grace's spine went rigid. So that's why you're here. Not for her, For the land. I found out 3 days ago that my own mother handpicked this deal and sent me straight to your doorstep, Nathaniel said, low, because she wanted to test whether I'd still choose you if I ever found you again. And whichever way it went, she'd have leverage over me either way. I don't know how to be a father to a 9-year-old who reads me like I'm a bad contract, and I don't know how to look at you without wanting to undo 9 years I can't get back. And I have no idea what to do with either of those things. So yes, I brought paperwork, because paperwork is the only language I've had any practice in for a very long time. But I'm not signing it. It was, Grace realized, the most honest thing he'd said to her since the day he first told her he loved her, 11 years ago, in a life that no longer resembled either of theirs. From the doorway of the little apartment above the stand, unnoticed by either adult, Ivy stood very still, listening to every word, and already forming an opinion about what should happen next. Ivy Whitfield had spent 9 years watching her mother work twice as hard as anyone else in town, and never once complain about it out loud. She had also spent 9 years being smarter than most adults gave her credit for. And she was done watching two grown-ups circle each other like they had all the time in the world, when she knew, better than anyone, that they didn't. "Can I say something?" Ivy said, stepping out onto the stand's little porch the next morning, arms crossed, carrot still somehow in her hand like a permanent fixture. Both adults turned, caught. "You," Ivy said, pointing at Nathaniel, "clearly have money. Like, a lot of it. And apparently a mom who plays chess with people's lives. And you," she pointed at her mother, "clearly still like him, even though you're pretending really hard that you don't, because you burned the toast twice this week, and you never burn the toast." "Ivy, I'm not finished." Ivy held up a hand, with the calm authority of someone twice her age. "I don't need a dad who buys me things. I've done fine without one. But I would like to know my dad, if he's actually interested in that, and not just interested in feeling guilty for 9 years and then leaving again because it's easier. And I definitely don't want a grandmother who thinks of me as a business problem." Nathaniel crouched down until he was eye level with her, something in his chest cracking open in a way boardrooms had never once managed. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not this time. And she doesn't get a say in this family anymore, not unless she earns it." "Good," Ivy said. "Then you can start by not tearing down my mom's stand." "That's non-negotiable." For the first time in 9 years, Nathaniel Cross laughed. A real one, startled out of him. "Deal." Eleanor Cross arrived in town 4 days later, uninvited, in a car far too polished for Miller Street, expecting to fix what she considered a temporary lapse in her son's judgment. She found him behind the vegetable stand, sleeves rolled up, stacking crates with a precision she'd never seen him apply to anything that wasn't a spreadsheet, while a small girl with Eleanor's own eyes, sharp, appraising, utterly unafraid, directed him like a foreman. "Nathaniel, a word. Anything you want to say to me," Nathaniel said, not stopping his work. "You can say in front of Grace. And Ivy. They've earned the right to hear it, especially since you engineered this entire reunion, like it was a due diligence report." Eleanor's composure flickered, just slightly, at the sight of the girl watching her with open, unflinching curiosity. "You have no idea what you're giving up. The board is already asking questions about your distraction. And I did what I did because I needed to know, once and for all, which version of you would win. The one I raised, or the one she made you into. You don't get to run tests on my life," Nathaniel said. "You spent 9 years deciding what I was allowed to know. And when I found out anyway, you tried to control how I found out too. That's not protection. That's fear of losing your grip. I did it to protect you." "You did it," Grace said quietly, stepping forward, "to protect the version of him that was useful to you, not the one who was happy. Both times." Eleanor looked at her son, really looked at him, and for the first time in a very long time, didn't have a counteroffer ready. "I already spoke to the board this morning," Nathaniel said. "You're being moved off the executive committee, effective this quarter. You'll keep your shares. You will not keep a hand on how this company, or this family is run. I built enough trust with the board over the last 9 years that they didn't ask a single question when I asked for the vote." Eleanor's composure finally, visibly cracked. "You can't be serious. I built that seat before you could walk. You taught me how to close a deal without blinking," Nathaniel said. "Turns out that lesson works on you too." The vegetable stand on the corner of Miller and Fifth did not get torn down. It got rebuilt. Wider counters, a proper roof, a chalkboard sign Ivy insisted on designing herself, and a small brass plaque near the register that read, "Whitfield and Daughter," because Grace had built it alone for 9 years, and Ivy wasn't about to let anyone forget that. Nathaniel didn't move his company headquarters to Miller Street. But he moved himself, a house 3 blocks away, close enough that Ivy could walk to either home, close enough that some mornings, before the stand opened, he'd show up in a shirt that cost more than a month's rent and stack crates until his hands remembered what work without a title felt like. He and Grace didn't rush anything. 9 years wasn't a wound that closed because the truth finally came out. And trust, in his mother's manipulations, in Marcus's divided loyalty, in his own judgment, took longer to rebuild than the stand did. But most evenings, after the stand closed, he'd stay for dinner, and most evenings, Grace found herself laughing at something he said, before she remembered to guard against it. Eleanor Cross was no longer on the executive committee. She sent one letter, unopened, still sitting in a drawer Grace hadn't decided what to do with. The first time in either of their lives that Eleanor had reached out with no leverage left to offer. And every morning, at 5 a.m., Ivy sorted the carrots largest to smallest, the way she always had. Except now there were 2 sets of hands helping her, and a father who had finally, 9 years too late, learned exactly what he'd almost let slip away, and exactly how far his own mother had gone to test him one last time. If this story hit you somewhere, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. End.